Still, the Christmas tree lights blinked as I held my son's note saying he'd left without telling me. As I folded the paper slowly, I kept my shoulders calm, refusing to let hurt spill into the room. While those same lights kept flickering, the house felt larger, emptier, like it had chosen sides. The same glow reminded me how many years I spent believing a father's place was guaranteed. That's when I realized the betrayal wasn't the trip, it was the silence he left behind. Still watching the lights blink, I decided I wouldn't chase absence. I'd let it explain itself. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. John woke up early on Christmas morning, the kind of quiet joy that comes from years of tradition. The smell of fresh coffee wafted from the kitchen, and the lights on the Christmas tree twinkled in the corner of the living room. He stretched, a satisfied smile tugging at his lips as he thought about the day ahead. His son Andrew, his daughter-in-law Sarah, and Linda would all be here soon. He could already imagine the laughter, the exchange of gifts, the warmth of family filling the house. It was Christmas, after all. But as he made his way down the stairs, something felt off. The house was eerily silent. No sounds of movement, no distant chatter or clinking of dishes. His footsteps echoed as he walked through the hall and into the living room. The Christmas tree stood tall and proud, its ornaments shining like tiny memories, but the room was empty, too empty. He paused for a moment, his heart suddenly heavy in his chest. He checked the kitchen next, expecting to find Linda bustling about preparing breakfast. But no, it was just as quiet as the rest of the house. He looked around, confused. That's when he saw it, a small note on the kitchen counter. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. It was short, nothing elaborate, just a few words scrawled in Andrew's familiar handwriting. "We're sorry, but Sarah and I are heading to the Caribbean for a surprise trip. We'll be back soon. Merry Christmas. Andrew." The words hit him like a punch in the stomach. His hand dropped to his side, the note crumpling slightly between his fingers. A vacation. Without him. He stared at the paper, trying to make sense of what he was reading. It didn't feel real. He moved back into the living room, staring at the tree, the stockings hanging from the mantel, the gifts that had been carefully picked out, waiting to be opened. His stomach churned. For a moment he thought he might be dreaming, but the weight of the note in his hand, the silence of the house, it was all too real. He pulled out his phone, dialing Andrew's number, his heart racing in his chest. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. He hung up and tried again, and again. No answer, just silence. John sank into the couch, the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. It wasn't just about the trip. It was everything. The slow drift between him and Andrew over the years. The conversations that had become fewer, the moments when his son's presence felt more like a duty than a joy. But this was the moment it all came crashing down, the final confirmation that something had broken beyond repair. He sat there alone, the Christmas tree glowing softly in front of him, each twinkling light a bitter reminder of what was supposed to be. The house felt cold now, despite the heat from the furnace. John wondered, not for the first time, when things had started falling apart. Was it when Andrew moved away for his job? Was it when they stopped sharing family dinners? Or had it been something even deeper? The anger rose within him, but so did the sorrow, the grief of realizing that his family had moved on without him. The phone in his hand buzzed suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. But it was Andrew, just a text from Linda. "Are you up? Where's everyone?" John stared at the message, his fingers hovering over the keys. He wanted to tell her, to scream his confusion, his hurt. But instead he put the phone down, letting the silence swallow him whole. John sat there, the phone in his hand, staring at the blank screen. His mind was a swirl of frustration, hurt, and confusion. It had been hours since he found the note, hours since his world had shifted on its axis. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, that the absence of his son and daughter-in-law was more than just a last-minute trip. They'd never done something like this before, left without even a word. The silence had already been deafening, but now it felt suffocating. He pressed Andrew's name on his contacts list again, the familiar photo of his son flashing on the screen. For a brief second, he thought about just letting it go. Maybe they were too busy, maybe it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, he knew it was. This was personal. This was about more than a vacation. He raised the phone to his ear, waiting for the familiar ring. Once, twice, three times. The phone rang out and then, as expected, the voicemail picked up. "Andrew, it's Dad." John's voice was unsteady, even to his own ears. I just, I just need to know why you didn't tell me about this. Why leave without saying anything? It's Christmas, for God's sake. I don't understand why I wasn't included." He hung up the phone and stared at the screen for a moment, his chest tightening. His finger hovered over the redial button, but it was too late. A wave of hopelessness swept over him as he set the phone down, the silence pressing on him even harder than before. Minutes passed, dragging like hours before the phone buzzed in his hand. A call from Andrew. "Hey, Dad." Andrew's voice was casual, almost too casual considering the situation. "Sorry, I didn't get your message earlier. Things have been kind of crazy. But yeah, it was a last-minute decision. Sarah's birthday and all. We just thought it would be nice to get away." John's grip tightened on the phone, his fingers starting to sweat. The defensiveness in Andrew's tone was unmistakable, but it was the lack of real explanation that cut through him like a knife. "Last minute," John repeated, his voice barely controlled. "You couldn't have mentioned it before. We could have made plans, figured something out. Hell, we've spent every Christmas together. Why didn't you think to tell me? I'm your father, Andrew." There was a long pause on the other end, the silence heavy. Finally, Andrew spoke, his voice more clipped now. "Dad, it's just I needed to get away. I needed space, okay? The pressure of, the holidays, family expectations. It's a lot sometimes. I didn't think you'd understand, but I had to do this for me." John's heart pounded in his chest. The words felt like a slap, the weight of them sinking deeper into his gut with every second. The pressure of family. Was that really it? Was that what this had all come to? He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. "I see," John said quietly, his voice cracking just slightly. "So that's it. You just needed space, and I'm not part of the equation anymore." There was no answer at first. The tension hung thick in the air. "Dad, I didn't mean it like that," Andrew replied, his voice quieter now, softer. I'm sorry if it hurt you. I just needed a break." John felt his chest tighten, his hands shaking. A break, right. He had no words left to say, nothing that wouldn't sound bitter or desperate. So instead he hung up, the finality of it striking him like cold water. He set the phone down beside him and sat back, the weight of the conversation crushing him. Linda, hearing the shift in the room, appeared at the door. "John, are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. John forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," he muttered, "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He wasn't fine at all. As Linda sat beside him, trying to offer comfort, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The emotional distance between him and Andrew had been growing for years, and now it felt permanent. He wondered, not for the first time, if things could ever go back to the way they were, if there was any chance of mending what had already been broken. Christmas Day stretched on, but it felt nothing like the holiday John had envisioned. The morning had come and gone in a blur of quiet emptiness. The house, once filled with laughter and the chaos of gift exchanges, now stood in hushed silence. John sat in the living room, his gaze fixed on the glowing Christmas tree, but it did nothing to warm him. The lights seemed like cruel reminders of what should have been, a holiday spent with family, not alone. He replayed memories of better times, images of Andrew as a child, running around the house with excitement, his face lighting up with joy. Those were the days when family was everything, when their bond seemed unbreakable. John's chest tightened as he thought about how far they had drifted. What happened? When did things start to shift so dramatically? He tried to remember the last time they'd shared a moment of real connection, but the more he searched, the more distant those memories seemed. Linda moved about the house, quietly putting away dishes, tidying up the remnants of what should have been a festive morning. She cast occasional glances at John, but he remained a silent figure, unmoving. She approached him once, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "John, you should eat something, maybe take a walk." But he didn't respond. She tried again, her voice more insistent this time. "I know you're hurting, I get it, but you have to talk to me. Don't shut me out." But John couldn't find the words. The hurt, the confusion, the raw anger, everything was tangled up inside him, and he didn't know how to express it. How could he explain to Linda when he couldn't even fully understand it himself? As the day wore on, the silence between them grew more pronounced. John's phone buzzed on the table, its screen lighting up with a message from Sarah. He picked it up, his thumb hovering over the text. "Merry Christmas, John. Hope you're doing well." Sarah, the words were polite, neutral even, but there was no mention of the trip, no explanation, no apology. John stared at the message for a long time, a strange hollow feeling settling in his stomach. Was this it? Was this all he was worth to them now? An afterthought. He set the phone down with a sense of finality and stood up. Cleaning. It was something he could do, something simple. Maybe it would fill the emptiness, even if just for a moment. He moved through the house, picking up discarded wrapping paper, tidying up the kitchen, trying to force some semblance of order in the midst of his confusion. But no matter how much he cleaned, the house never seemed to feel any less empty. Linda watched him from the doorway, her concern growing with every passing hour. "John, have you thought about why Andrew might have done this?" she asked gently, her voice breaking the silence like a soft echo. "Maybe it's more than just the trip. Maybe there's something deeper that he's not telling you." John paused, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. He looked at her, a mixture of exhaustion and frustration in his eyes. "I don't know, Linda," he said, his voice raw. "But I need to know. I need answers. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." He took a deep breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "When he gets back, I'll talk to him. I'll confront him. I can't just sit here and let this go on any longer." The tension in the room hung heavy, unspoken, as Linda gave a quiet nod. There was no reassurance, no promise of easy answers. But John knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. Something needed to change, and it would start with a conversation. Whether Andrew was ready for it or not, John was determined to get to the truth. The thought of it stirred something deep inside him, a mix of dread and resolve. Whatever was waiting on the other side of that conversation, John knew it couldn't wait any longer. John sat in the dim light of the living room, the quiet of the house swallowing him whole. It had been days since the phone call with Andrew, and the silence between them had grown unbearable. His mind kept circling back to that one question. Why? Why had Andrew distanced himself like this? What had happened to the bond they once shared? He found himself lost in thought, flipping through old family photo albums in a feeble attempt to reconnect with the past. His fingers brushed over a picture of a family vacation they had taken years ago, a trip to the beach when Andrew was still a kid, full of laughter and carefree moments. John studied the photo, the smile on Andrew's face frozen in time, a far cry from the cold, distant man he had spoken to on the phone. When did everything change, he wondered? Was it gradual? Had there been signs he'd missed? Or had something deep inside his son shifted all at once, leaving John in the dark? He sighed, setting the album down and running his hand through his hair. The memories didn't help, not now. They only reminded him of the distance, of the years that had slipped by unnoticed. Years of quiet misunderstandings, of moments where he had pushed Andrew harder than he should have, but never truly understanding the impact it had. Was that the reason? Was it his fault? The weight of it all was suffocating. He needed answers. He needed closure. And so, without thinking, he reached for his phone once again. The familiar name, Andrew, flashed on the screen. His finger hovered over the call button, the anger bubbling up inside him. He couldn't keep pretending he was okay with this. He deserved to know. John pressed dial and the phone rang, and rang. The voicemail picked up. "Andrew, it's Dad." John's voice was tight with frustration, the words coming out sharper than he intended. "I need you to answer me. I need you to tell me what's going on. Why are you avoiding me? Why did you leave without telling me? What happened to us?" He hung up, barely waiting for the beep, and sat back, feeling a surge of emotion flood over him. He didn't have to wait long. The phone buzzed in his hand. A call from Andrew. "Hey, Dad," Andrew's voice was hesitant, strained. I got your message." John's heart raced. This was it, the conversation he had been avoiding, the one he had been dreading. "I need answers, Andrew. I need to know what's been going on." There was a long pause. John's patience was wearing thin, but he forced himself to stay calm, waiting for his son's response. "I've been avoiding you," Andrew finally admitted, his voice flat. "It's not you, Dad, it's me." His words hung heavy in the air. John's chest tightened. "What do you mean, I tease me? You've been avoiding me for years now. I've tried, Andrew. I've tried so hard to be there for you, and this is how you repay me." "I couldn't take it anymore," Andrew's voice cracked. "The pressure, the expectations, the constant criticism, it was too much. I felt like I could never be good enough. I needed to get away, to figure things out on my own." The words hit John like a slap. The years of effort, of trying to guide and help his son, all framed as criticism. He felt his chest tighten, a storm of emotions building up. Was that really how it had been? Was he so blinded by his own sense of duty that he couldn't see how his actions were pushing Andrew further away? Andrew's next words were quieter, almost apologetic. "I need space to grow, to figure out who I am, outside of all the expectations. I don't know how to be your son the way you want me to be." John's heart sank. This is it, the moment everything broke. It wasn't one argument or one decision. It was the accumulation of years of strained silence, of missed opportunities to truly connect. Had it all been for nothing? The years of sacrifice, of being there for Andrew, only to be told that it was all too much, that it had driven him away. John stood, pacing the room, the weight of the revelation crushing him. "I didn't know, Andrew. I didn't know," he whispered. There was no response on the other end. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, before Andrew finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Dad, I need time." The words lingered in the air long after the call ended. John stood still, the phone in his hand, feeling the full force of his son's words settle into his bones. Betrayal, confusion, regret, they all swirled inside him, making it hard to breathe. Was this really the end of their relationship? Or was it just the beginning of a new, painful chapter? The days that followed the conversation with Andrew were slow, drawn out by the weight of everything left unsaid. John found himself moving through the motions, eating, sleeping, working, each day feeling like an echo of the last. He couldn't shake the conversation that had shattered so much between them. The pressure, the expectations, Andrew's words echoed in his mind, each repetition digging deeper. He couldn't help but wonder if he'd really been that bad, if his constant pushing had truly driven his son away. The house felt cold, despite the Christmas decorations still adorning every room. The lights on the tree flickered softly, the soft glow a cruel reminder of a time when things had been simpler, when family had been whole. John stood in front of the tree, staring at the framed photographs hanging on the walls. He walked over to the bookshelves and pulled down an old photo album, one that had been tucked away for years. It was filled with pictures of Andrew as a child, full of life and energy, moments frozen in time. There were photos from vacations, birthdays, and holidays, each one a snapshot of a better time. But as he flipped through the pages, something changed. He started to notice the subtle shifts. In the earlier photos, Andrew's smile was easy, his eyes filled with joy. But by the time the album reached the more recent photos, those smiles started to look forced, the energy in their family moments growing more strained. John traced a picture of Andrew's graduation, Andrew in his cap and gown, his face looking proud but distant. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What happened? The question gnawed at him, more persistent than any of the others. Had he been so focused on pushing Andrew to succeed that he missed the signs? Had he tried to mold him into something he wasn't, pushing him down a path that was never his to walk? Linda had been quiet these last few days, giving John space, but she could see the weight on him. She saw how he withdrew further into himself with each passing day. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen, Linda spoke gently, her voice filled with quiet concern. "John, have you thought about reaching out to Andrew again?" she asked. "I know you're hurt, but you can't keep shutting him out. He's your son." John looked at her, unsure of how to respond. His mind was in turmoil. Part of him wanted to pick up the phone to try again to fix what had been broken. But another part of him was terrified of what that call might bring. What if things got worse? What if the distance between them became permanent? "I don't know," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know where to start." He spent the rest of the evening lost in thought. Should he apologize? Should he admit to his own shortcomings as a father, even if that meant facing the guilt he'd been avoiding for years? Or was it too late? Maybe the damage had already been done. Maybe Andrew had already made his decision. The next morning, as he sat at the kitchen table, John's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, and there it was, a Christmas card fro. M. Andrew. It was simple, with a generic "Merry Christmas" written inside, but there was no warmth in it, no real sentiment, just a signature, no words of love, no apology. John stared at the card, feeling a hollow emptiness spread inside him. He ran his fingers over the paper, his mind spinning with unanswered questions. Was this all they had left? Was this how it ended, just a card and nothing else? He set the card down, staring at it for a long time. Should he continue fighting for a relationship that seemed so distant now? Or was it time to let go? John didn't know the answer. All he knew was that the road ahead felt uncertain, filled with more questions than answers. And the hardest part was realizing that whatever choice he made, it might be the last one. The door creaked open and John's heart skipped a beat. Andrew and Sarah stood in the entryway, their luggage in tow, the faint scent of tropical air still clinging to their clothes. For a moment, everything felt surreal, like this was some strange dream he couldn't wake up from. The silence between them stretched thick, hanging in the air, before John finally spoke. "You're back," John said, his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. His fists clenched at his sides, but he fought to keep his tone steady. "I thought we could talk about this, about why you left." Andrew shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Sarah before turning his attention back to John. "Dad, I told you already. It wasn't about you. It was just Sarah's birthday and we needed a break. It was last minute, okay?" His voice was tight, defensive, the words rushed out as if he'd been rehearsing them over and over in his head. John could feel the anger rising within him, a slow burn that threatened to explode. "A break? You couldn't even give me a heads up. You just left without saying anything. Christmas morning of all days." His voice cracked as he said it, and he hated himself for it. The disappointment felt like a weight pressing on his chest. "I'm your father, Andrew. I deserve better than that." Andrew's eyes shifted, the discomfort on his face morphing into something more guarded. "I didn't think you'd understand," he muttered, his hands gripping his luggage a little tighter. "You've always had these expectations of me, Dad, always pushing me to be something I'm not. I needed to get away from all of that." The words hit John like a punch. He had suspected it, but hearing Andrew say it aloud made it real. "My expectations," John repeated, his voice faltering. "I was just trying to be a father, to support you. I wanted you to succeed." Andrew's face darkened, the words coming faster now. "But it was never enough, was it? You always wanted more. You pushed me to do things I didn't want to do, to be someone I didn't want to be. It wasn't just about the career or the money. It was about me always falling short, always disappointing you." He stepped back, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. John felt his heart crack open at the accusation. He had always thought he was doing the right thing, always convinced that pushing Andrew, guiding him, was what a father should do. But now, hearing it from his son's lips, It was like a mirror was held up to everything he'd ever believed about himself, and he didn't like what he saw. Sarah, sensing the growing tension, stepped in, her voice soft but firm. "Andrew, maybe we should just—" But John cut her off, his frustration reaching its peak. "No, no, Sarah, this is exactly the problem. Everyone keeps brushing it aside like it's no big deal." He turned back to Andrew, struggling to keep his composure. "Do you really think I wanted to make you feel this way? Do you think I didn't care about how hard you worked? I did, Andrew. I just wanted you to know that I was proud of you, that I saw you." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Sarah looked between them, her face torn, but there were no words that could fix this. John's hands were trembling now, his anger melting into something else, something raw and painful. Andrew looked away, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to fix this, Dad. I really don't." John felt every ounce of hope drained from him. The words hung in the air, unfinished, and for the first time he truly wondered if there was anything left to salvage between them. The conversation ended with no resolution, just empty space stretching farther than he'd ever imagined. And as Andrew and Sarah retreated to their room, John stood frozen in the doorway, the silence louder than any argument could ever be. Was this it? Was this how it ended? The knot in his stomach tightened as he realized. He didn't know if he could keep fighting anymore. John sat in the quiet of the living room, staring out the window as the evening light faded into darkness. The house felt bigger now, emptier, and it weighed heavily on him. After the confrontation with Andrew, after the words that had been spoken, and the feelings that had been laid bare, John was left feeling lost. He had tried so hard to bridge the distance between them, but it always seemed to slip further away. Each time he thought they might be close to understanding, the gap widened once more. What was left for him to do? Linda had been trying to reassure him, her voice soft but persistent. "Don't give up on him, John. He's your son. He needs you." She had said it more than once, but John couldn't find it in himself to believe those words anymore. It wasn't about giving up. It was about the exhaustion that had settled deep in his bones. The emotional toll of trying to repair a bond that felt beyond repair was wearing him down. He felt as if every conversation, every effort to make things right, was just a step closer to an inevitable conclusion. That night, after another silent dinner with Linda, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. Maybe it wasn't about fixing things with Andrew at all. Maybe it was about him, about who he was now, after everything. He had given so much to his family over the years, sacrificed parts of himself without ever asking for anything in return. But now, with the growing distance between him and Andrew and the emotional fatigue of it all, John couldn't help but wonder, had he lost himself in the process? The next morning, he picked up the phone and called an old friend. Steve had known him for years, had been there through the ups and downs of life. The conversation started small, as they always did, but eventually, John found himself spilling out everything that had been weighing on him. "I don't know what to do anymore," John confessed. "I feel like I've given everything to my family, and now I'm not even sure if they want me there." There was a pause on the other end, a moment of silence before Steve's voice came through, calm and steady. "John, you've done everything you can, but maybe it's time to stop trying so hard. You can't force someone to meet you where you are. If Andrew needs space, you've got to give it to him. Let him come to you when he's ready." John leaned back in his chair, the weight of Steve's words sinking in. He didn't want to hear it, didn't want to admit that maybe he couldn't control this, couldn't fix everything. But the truth was, deep down, he already knew. He had been trying to patch a relationship with a son who wasn't ready, and in doing so, he had neglected the one relationship that mattered the most, the one with himself. As the conversation ended and he hung up the phone, John felt a shift inside him, subtle but undeniable. Maybe it was time to take a step back, not just from Andrew but from everything. He needed to find himself again. He needed to rediscover who he was outside of being a father, a husband, a provider. The thought was both terrifying and freeing. For the first time in a long while, John allowed himself to think about his own needs. What had he sacrificed? His passions, his dreams, his sense of self, all of it had been buried under the weight of family expectations. Slowly, the realization dawned on him. He had to reclaim his own life, piece by piece. John stood up, a quiet resolve settling over him. He wasn't giving up on Andrew, but he wasn't going to keep sacrificing himself for a relationship that wasn't ready to be healed. It would take time, maybe more time than he had the patience for, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't force it. He had to let go. And with that, the first step toward his own life began. But the question remained: would Andrew ever come back? Or had the distance between them already grown too wide? Weeks passed, but the silence never fully left John's house. The days stretched on in a monotonous blur. John went through the motions: work, dinner with Linda, a few quiet walks, but every step felt like he was carrying the weight of unspoken words, of a relationship hanging by a thread. He didn't know what to expect from Andrew anymore, but deep down, he had already begun to resign himself to the idea that maybe the distance between them was permanent. Maybe this was just how things were now. Then one afternoon, as John sat in the living room, a phone call broke the silence. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something in his gut told him it was Andrew. His pulse quickened, and for a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail. What if this was just another brush-off, another shallow attempt to keep things cordial but distant? But he couldn't. Not this time. He answered the phone, his voice steady but cautious. "Hello." "Dad," Andrew's voice came through, hesitant but unmistakable. "It's Andrew." John's heart tightened. He wasn't sure what to feel, wasn't sure if he was prepared for this conversation. But Andrew's next words caught him off guard. I'm sorry," Andrew said, the words coming slowly, as if he'd been wrestling with them for days. "I've been thinking a lot, and I know I've hurt you. The way I've been avoiding you, it wasn't right. It was my way of protecting myself, but I see now how much it hurt you." John listened, his mind racing. An apology. After all this time, after everything that had been left unsaid, John had almost forgotten how it felt to hear those words. Part of him wanted to grab onto this moment, to cling to the possibility of reconciliation. But another part of him was hesitant, unsure if he could trust the sincerity in Andrew's voice. "I didn't realize how much my actions hurt you," Andrew continued, his voice thick with regret. "I thought I was just distancing myself from everything, from the pressure, from you. But I see now that it wasn't fair to you. I've been blind to how much you've done for me, how much you've sacrificed." John felt a lump form in his throat. The pain of the past weeks, no, months rushed back, but there was something else too. A strange sense of relief. Maybe this wasn't the end of it. Maybe there was still a way forward. But even as the relief settled in, sadness followed quickly behind. It wasn't just the apology, it was everything that had led them here, everything that had gone wrong between them. "Andrew," John's voice broke slightly, and he cleared his throat. "I've always wanted what's best for you, but I know now that I pushed too hard. I didn't realize how much I was making you feel like you had to live up to something that wasn't you. I'm sorry for that too." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment John wondered if he had said too much, if the distance between them was still too great to overcome. But then Andrew spoke again, this time softer, more vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Dad, I really am. I didn't want to hurt you, and I don't want things to stay this way. But I know it's going to take time to rebuild trust, to heal." Andrew paused, the weight of his words hanging between them. "Can we take it slow? Can we figure this out together?" John closed his eyes, letting the question settle in. He wasn't sure if he was ready to fully open his heart again, but he knew that this conversation, was the first step toward something better, something that wasn't defined by the hurt that had come before. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks, but there was a chance, a real chance. "I'm willing to try," John said, his voice steady now, though still carrying the weight of everything they had endured. "But I need time, too. I need time to heal." Andrew seemed to understand, his voice quiet, but resolute. "I get it, Dad. We'll take it slow, one step at a time." As John hung up the phone, he sat back in his chair, feeling a cautious optimism he hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning, a small step forward. And for the first time in a long time, John allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But the question lingered: how long would it take to rebuild what had been broken? Would they ever truly heal? The weeks after the phone call felt like a fragile truce. John and Andrew didn't immediately fall back into old habits, nor did they pretend everything was fine. But there was something different now, something hopeful, albeit delicate. They began reconnecting slowly, cautiously, the distance between them shrinking bit by bit with each conversation. It started with small steps. They would meet for coffee, awkward at first, the silence between them charged with years of unsaid words. But as they sat across from each other, something began to shift. The weight of past grievances wasn't gone, but it didn't dominate every conversation anymore. Instead, they found themselves sharing old memories, those simpler times when Andrew was young, running through the backyard on hot summer days, laughing uncontrollably as John chased after him. They talked about vacations, family dinners, and the way they used to be able to talk without the walls that had grown between them. The memories didn't erase the pain, but they made the space between them feel a little smaller. The real breakthroughs, though, came when they started addressing the differences that had pushed them apart in the first place. John listened as Andrew opened up about how he had felt stifled by his father's expectations, how he'd spent years trying to meet a standard that never seemed to match who he was. John hadn't known it had been so painful, hadn't realized how much his desire for Andrew to succeed had started to feel like a demand for perfection. For the first time in a long time, John didn't try to fix things. He didn't offer advice or suggest a solution. He just listened. It wasn't easy, the urge to fix everything always there in the back of his mind, but he knew, truly knew, that this wasn't about fixing anything. It was about understanding, about accepting that Andrew wasn't the person John had envisioned him to be. He had to let go of his need to control, to shape Andrew's life, and accept him for who he was becoming. Sarah, too, was cautiously supportive. She watched as the conversations between father and son unfolded, her skepticism slowly turning into hope. She wasn't blind to the work that still lay ahead, but she encouraged Andrew, urging him to keep making the effort. There were times when she stepped in, trying to ease tensions when they arose, but it was clear that she was rooting for them, for the possibility of something better. Meanwhile, John continued therapy. It was hard, confronting his own need for control, his constant drive to ensure everything was perfect, but it was necessary. His therapist had helped him understand that some of his actions had been driven by fear, fear of failure, fear of being abandoned. Therapy wasn't an easy fix, but it was helping him see things from a new perspective. Linda watched all of this with a quiet relief, her heart lightened by the progress, but she understood the journey wasn't over. The road to rebuilding their relationship was long and uncertain, and there were still moments of hesitation. But she had faith in John's resolve, in his willingness to work through the pain, and she was hopeful that Andrew felt the same. As the weeks passed, John and Andrew continued to take small steps. There were still moments of discomfort, times when old patterns crept back into their conversations, but the foundation was there. A new bond, still fragile but real. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. John didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful. He knew that trust couldn't be rushed, that it would take time and patience, but the small steps they were taking felt like the beginning of something lasting. What that would look like, he couldn't yet say. But as he sat across from Andrew, listening to him talk about his life, John felt a cautious optimism settle in his chest. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. But even as the hope grew, a question lingered in the back of his mind. Would their bond ever be as strong as it once was? Or was this new relationship one that could never fully replace what they had lost? It was Christmas again, and the house felt different this time. John stood by the window, looking out at the quiet, snow-covered yard. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from the neighbor's chimney. There was a peace in the stillness, a quiet that matched the cautious optimism that had taken root in his heart over the past year. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. The painful silence from the year before had started to fade, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of rebuilding. When the doorbell rang, John's heart skipped a beat. It was Andrew and Sarah standing on the threshold with a wrapped box in hand. They were no longer strangers, no longer the people who had left without a word. They were family again, still imperfect but trying. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said, his voice softer than it had been the year before, more open. He stepped inside, his eyes meeting John's with an intensity that spoke volumes. We got you something." John glanced at the box in Andrew's hands. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple gift, but the gesture was more meaningful than anything wrapped in shiny paper. He took the box, his fingers brushing against Andrew's as he accepted it. There was a long pause between them, the weight of their history pressing down on the moment. Andrew cleared his throat, and before John could speak, he added, "I just want to say, I'm really sorry for last year, for everything. I know it hurt you, and I wasn't thinking. It wasn't right." John's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the first time he had heard the apology, but something about the way Andrew said it, so raw, so vulnerable, touched him in a way he hadn't expected. For so long, John had held onto the hurt, the betrayal of being left behind. He had told himself that he was fine, that he had moved past it, but hearing Andrew's sincere apology stirred something deep inside him. "I know it's going to take time to heal, Dad," Andrew continued, "but I want you to know I'm here. I'm trying to be better." John felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness wash over him. Gratitude for the apology, for the effort, but sadness for all the time they had lost. He nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm still healing, Andrew, but I accept it, and I appreciate the effort." His voice cracked, but he steadied himself. "Thank you." The conversation shifted to safer ground as they moved into the kitchen, preparing for Christmas dinner. This time, there were fewer expectations. No grand gestures of reconciliation, no desperate attempts to fix everything in one day. Instead, there was an openness, a willingness to simply be together, to share the moment without the weight of unresolved tensions hanging over them. As they gathered around the dinner table, Sarah turned to John, her face reflecting the same sincerity she had shown the year before. "John," she began, her voice gentle but filled with emotion, "I just want to say, I'm sorry too, for the awkwardness I created last year, for not being the bridge I should have been between you two." She paused, meeting his gaze. "I know I wasn't perfect, but I want to do better, for all of us." John felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He wasn't sure what the future held, but in this moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here together, trying. The evening passed in a quiet, peaceful rhythm, the kind that had once felt out of reach. Laughter filled the room, but it was different now, more genuine, more grounded in the understanding that healing wasn't about perfection. It was about the willingness to try, to make the effort, even when the past still lingered in the background. As they sat back, content from dinner and the easy camaraderie that had begun to form between them, John looked at his family, his imperfect, still healing family. And though there were still questions about the future, about how long it would take to rebuild fully, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. This Christmas wasn't perfect, it wasn't a grand resolution, but it was a step forward, and in that John found hope. Yet as the evening drew to a close, the question lingered in John's mind. Could they truly move beyond the past, or was the damage too deep to ever fully overcome? The process of rebuilding their relationship was slow, painstaking, but necessary. John and Andrew had made progress, yes, but it was like walking on a tightrope. Every conversation felt like a step forward, but the tension between them still lingered, like an old wound that had healed but left a scar that wouldn't fade easily. John could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, but there was also a flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. John had started therapy. It wasn't easy, confronting the resentment he had carried for so many years, but he knew he couldn't move forward without facing it head-on. Each session was a painful but necessary step. His therapist had helped him see that his need for control, his constant drive to shape Andrew's life, had been born from a fear of failure, of being abandoned. But John had never truly understood how those fears had shaped his actions until now. Letting go of resentment, the therapist had said, is the first step toward healing. It wasn't easy. John had spent so much of his life holding on to anger, believing it was a way to protect himself. But now, in therapy, he had to confront that anger, piece by piece, and slowly start to release it. It felt like unraveling years of emotional knots. But with each session, the weight of those old grudges began to lift just a little. He could feel himself changing, learning to accept what had happened instead of trying to rewrite it. Andrew, too, had started to open up more. Their conversations, once filled with awkward pauses and defensive remarks, had started to shift. Slowly, cautiously, Andrew began to reveal things he had never said before, the anger he had felt growing up, the resentment that had built up over the years. "I resented the way you always pushed me," Andrew admitted one afternoon, his voice quieter than usual. "I felt like I could never be enough for you. Like I was always falling short, no matter what I did." John's heart sank. He hadn't realized the extent of Andrew's pain. In his desire to push Andrew to succeed, to give him the opportunities he had never had, John had pushed him away instead. The realization stung, and for a moment John was silent, unsure of how to respond. But he knew this was part of the process, the hard, painful work of understanding each other's truths. Sarah had always been a quiet presence in the background, offering support without pushing, but even she had begun to confront her own feelings. One evening, as John and Andrew sat together, Sarah pulled John aside, her expression filled with guilt. "I've been part of the tension too," she confessed softly. "I should have done more to help you both see where things were going wrong. I let things fester instead of stepping in." John placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice reassuring but heavy with his own guilt. "We all did. We're all just trying to make sense of it." As the weeks passed, John and Andrew started meeting more regularly. At first, it was just for coffee, awkward silences punctuated by small talk. But slowly their conversations deepened. They talked about their childhood, their regrets, their dreams, without the weight of expectations hanging over them. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. They were learning to talk to each other again, to understand each other's perspectives. John could see the change in Andrew. He wasn't the same man who had shut him out for so long. And John wasn't the same father who had tried to control every aspect of his son's life. There was a cautious optimism now, a sense that things might one day be okay. But John knew it wouldn't be easy. Healing wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a quick fix. It would take time. The work they were doing now, the honest conversations, the small steps, was the foundation, but it was just that, the foundation. They still had a long way to go. John couldn't change the past, no matter how much he wished he could. But he could change how he moved forward. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for the future. But as he sat with Andrew, feeling the weight of everything that had brought them here, a question lingered in his mind. Would the scars of their past ever fully heal, or would they always be a part of them? The morning was quiet, just like every other morning since Andrew had returned to town. John had spent the last few weeks feeling a sense of cautious optimism, allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the distance between him and his son was starting to close. Their conversations had grown deeper, more honest. But now, as he glanced at his phone, that fragile sense of hope was beginning to fray. Andrew had called the night before to make plans. He and John were going to spend the afternoon together, reconnecting, maybe even talking about the things they hadn't been able to say before. It was exactly what John had hoped for, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. But as John opened the text from Andrew this morning, a knot tightened in his stomach. "Hey Dad, sorry, something came up. I need to work today. Can we reschedule?" The message wasn't a huge deal in itself, but the familiar sting of rejection hit John harder than he expected. Something came up. The words echoed in his head, each syllable a reminder of the times before, the countless moments where Andrew had chosen something else over him. John had been bracing for this kind of disappointment, but it didn't make it hurt any less. He stared at the phone, unsure of how to respond, feeling the old wound reopen. Had all their progress been a lie? Was it just a temporary fix, a fleeting moment of connection that would eventually fade back into the same old distance? His mind raced as doubt settled in. The hours stretched ahead of him like an empty void, and the silence between him and Andrew felt more oppressive than ever. Was it too soon to expect things to be different? Was he holding on to a false hope that, with a F, yield good conversations, everything could just magically be repaired? John wasn't sure anymore. The ache in his chest felt all too familiar. Just as he was about to put his phone down, it buzzed again. This time it was Andrew calling. "Hey, Dad," Andrew's voice was tentative, almost apologetic. "I'm really sorry about earlier. I know we were supposed to hang out today, but work it's been crazy. I'm still trying to figure out this balance between work and everything else. I didn't mean to let you down." John's heart softened at the sound of his son's voice, but the hurt was still there, lingering. "I get it," John said quietly, though he felt the sting of betrayal, however small. "It just feels like, every time we make plans, something else comes up. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Andrew. I need to know that what we're working on here, this progress, isn't just going to slip away." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Andrew spoke again, his voice more open now. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm still figuring things out. I've been so caught up with work, and I know that's not an excuse. I really do want to make this right. I'm trying. But old habits are hard to break." John felt a mix of frustration and understanding. He wasn't sure how to feel. The rejection still stung, but there was sincerity in Andrew's voice now. "I understand, but it doesn't make it easier," John replied. "You keep saying you're trying, but I need more than words, Andrew. I need you to show up. I need you to be here when you say you will." Andrew was quiet for a moment before finally agreeing. "I'll make it right, I promise. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? We can talk more then. I know I haven't been doing enough." The conversation left John with a complex mix of emotions. The doubt was still there, but there was something else, too, maybe the smallest flicker of hope. They hadn't fixed anything in that moment, but they had taken another step forward, even if it was just a small one. The next day, they met at the coffee shop, and for the first time in a long time, they sat together without the weight of expectation. They talked through the emotional distance that still lingered between them, the hurt, the fear of being let down again, the uncertainty of whether they could ever fully heal. Sarah, when she heard about the conversation, encouraged Andrew to make more of an effort to show his commitment to both the relationship with John and his family. "It's not just about saying the right things," she told him. "It's about making those words real through actions." John sat back in his chair, listening. He realized then that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about one big conversation or one perfect moment. It was about the constant effort to move forward, even when the road was rocky. As they parted ways, John couldn't shake the question that lingered. Would Andrew keep his word this time? Could their relationship ever be truly repaired, or was this just another attempt that would fade away with time? The uncertainty lingered, and John knew the next step in their journey wasn't just about making promises. It was about proving them. The weeks after their last conversation had been a quiet turning point for John. He had spent countless hours reflecting on everything, the missed moments, the mistakes, the growing distance between him and Andrew. For so long, he had defined himself by his role as a father, as a provider, someone who put the needs of his family before his own. But something had shifted inside him, a slow realization that had been creeping in like dawn after a long night. He couldn't keep waiting for Andrew to change. He couldn't keep sacrificing his own happiness in the hope that their relationship would magically fix itself. John knew now that he had to take control of his own life, regardless of what happened with Andrew. He couldn't pin all of his hopes on a relationship that had so many years of hurt and unmet expectations. It wasn't that he was giving up on Andrew, but he understood that he couldn't keep holding his breath, waiting for things to get better. He needed to start living for himself. It wasn't easy, this new decision. For years, his hobbies, his passions, anything that wasn't tied to his family, had been pushed aside. His guitar sat unused in the corner of the room, a pile of books collecting dust on the shelf. But John found himself picking up the guitar again one evening, running his fingers over the strings, feeling a flicker of joy that had long been buried. He started reading the books he'd meant to get to, diving into stories that had once sparked something in him. Slowly, the pieces of his own identity, his own life, began to return. It wasn't about ignoring his family or moving on from them. It was about rediscovering the parts of himself that he had sacrificed for so long. Andrew began to notice the change, though he didn't know exactly how to respond at first. He saw his father out more, engaging in conversations with people at the local coffee shop, laughing in a way he hadn't in years. John's presence seemed lighter, less burdened by the weight of past mistakes. It was a change that made Andrew feel both proud and guilty. Proud because he could see his father finally stepping into a version of himself that he had long ignored. But guilty because he realized how much of that burden had been placed on him, how much of John's happiness had been dependent on Andrew's approval and their fractured relationship. Sarah saw the change too, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. She encouraged Andrew to support his father, to embrace the changes that were happening, and to help his father balance his life and relationships. "It's not just about you, Andrew," she said one evening as they sat in their living room, a quiet moment amidst the noise of their lives. "Your dad's finally finding his own way. You should be proud of him. Help him along the way, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, too." Andrew wasn't sure how to help, but he knew she was right. He had to stop seeing his father's journey as something he was merely a part of and start seeing it as something they could share. He began to make small gestures, calling John more often, inviting him to events, showing up when he said he would. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. John, too, was moving forward. He had begun volunteering at a local community center, helping with youth programs and mentoring young people who reminded him of his younger self. It gave him a sense of purpose, something outside the confines of his family that allowed him to give back. There was fulfillment in it, an energy that had been missing for so long. One afternoon, as John was working on a new project at the center, he got an unexpected visit from Andrew. He stood in the doorway, a hesitant smile on his face. "Dad," Andrew said, his voice quiet but genuine, "I've been thinking. I see what you're doing, and I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of how much you've grown. It's inspiring." John felt a lump form in his throat. There was no big speech, no grand gesture, but the sincerity in Andrew's words hit him harder than anything. They stood there for a long moment, the weight of the years between them heavy but not suffocating. Finally, Andrew spoke again. "I want to rebuild our relationship, Dad. I want to be closer. I know I've got a lot to work on too, but I'm ready to try. I hope you are too." John felt a surge of emotion, but he kept his composure. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew that it was a new beginning, and that was enough for now. But as he looked at Andrew, the unspoken question hung between them. Could they ever truly rebuild the trust that had been lost, or would their efforts always be hindered by the scars of the past? The uncertainty lingered, but for the first time in a long while, John felt like they were headed in the right direction. The afternoon was quiet, the weight of the silence between John and Andrew hanging in the air as they sat across from each other. The years of tension, the resentment, the unspoken words, they all felt like an invisible wall, one neither of them had known how to break down until now. Andrew had called earlier in the week, suggesting they meet for a conversation, something more than the usual awkward coffee dates. Something deeper. John had agreed, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for what might come next. Andrew was the first to speak, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Dad," he started, his eyes downcast, "I don't think I ever really understood why you did what you did. The pushing, the expectations. I always thought you were just trying to make me live up to some standard to be someone I was, but I get it now." He paused, looking up at his father, vulnerability in his eyes. "I never realized how much pressure you were under, too, how much you were carrying." John felt the words settle deep within him, like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples through everything he had held onto for so long. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Andrew to open up, to finally see the weight John had been carrying too. But the flood of relief that came with hearing it was quickly replaced by something else. Pain. Regret. "I pushed you because I didn't know how else to make you see your potential," John said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought that if I could just guide you, if I could just make you understand how much I wanted the best for you, maybe you'd see it too. But in doing that, I lost sight of what you needed. I lost sight of what I needed." Andrew's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I felt like I could never do anything right, like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. I thought if I didn't meet your expectations, I'd fail you, but I never realized you were just afraid of losing me, of me not turning out the way you hoped." The rawness of the conversation left John breathless. For so many years, he had believed that Andrew's distance was a sign of failure on his part, that he wasn't doing enough as a father. But hearing Andrew's words now, he saw just how deeply their relationship had been defined by fear, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing each other. John swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I was afraid too," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that I wasn't enough. Afraid that if I didn't push you, you'd end up drifting away from me, and I wouldn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to just be your father without trying to fix everything." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah, who had been sitting quietly by the window listening, looked at both men with a soft expression. She saw them, truly saw them, for the first time in years. This was the conversation they both needed, the one that had been buried under years of pride, fear, and silence. She knew it wasn't over, this was just the beginning. But she felt a shift, a glimmer of hope that they were finally on the same page. John and Andrew looked at each other, their eyes meeting in a new kind of understanding. "I can't change the past," John said, "but I can try to understand what you need from me now. I'll try to meet you halfway." Andrew nodded slowly, the weight of the conversation still hanging between them. "I'll meet you halfway too, Dad. I'm not perfect, but I'm ready to try. I want to be closer to you." The air between them had shifted. There was no magic moment of complete resolution, no instant erasure of the past. But there was a quiet understanding, a realization that healing wasn't a destination. It was a process, and they had both just taken the first real step. As they stood up to leave, both feeling emotionally lighter but knowing there was still work ahead, the question lingered in John's mind. Could they truly rebuild what had been broken, or was this just the first step in a long, uncertain journey? The evening air was crisp as John stood by the kitchen window, staring out into the yard. The house felt strangely alive with possibility, though the tension in his chest refused to dissipate completely. Tonight was a big step, a family dinner, an attempt at something new, something better. After months of careful rebuilding, he had invited Andrew and Sarah over, hoping that it might mark the beginning of something different, something healthier. The meal, a simple roast and sides, felt almost irrelevant in comparison to the emotional weight of what was to come. As the doorbell rang, John's heart skipped a beat. He opened the door to find Andrew and Sarah standing on the porch, a bottle of wine in Andrew's hand, an expression of cautious optimism on his face. Sarah offered a warm smile, but John could see the lingering unease in her eyes. They all knew this dinner wasn't just about food. It was about something deeper. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said quietly, stepping inside with Sarah close behind him. "Thanks for doing this." John nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's good to have you here." The words felt heavy but true. They all knew the effort it took to get to this point. Dinner was served and they all sat around the table, the clink of silverware and the hum of distant conversation filling the room. But the silence between them was palpable. Every word, every gesture felt like an attempt to bridge the gap that had been there for so long. John noticed Andrew glancing at him every now and then, his eyes searching for something, maybe reassurance, maybe forgiveness. But John didn't know how to offer either just yet. They had come a long way, but the past still loomed like a shadow, unspoken. The meal itself was pleasant enough, though there were moments of awkwardness. John tried to fill the gaps in conversation, talking about work, the weather, anything to keep the tension from suffocating them. But it wasn't until the dishes were cleared away, the table empty, that something shifted. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," Andrew said, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "About last year, about everything. And I need to say this, Dad, I'm sorry. I should have been there for you. I was. I wasn't present in the way you deserved. I know I hurt you." John looked at his son, the words hitting harder than he had expected. Andrew had apologized before, but hearing him say it now, in the warmth of the home they once shared, made it feel different, more real. There was no defensiveness this time, no excuses, just raw sincerity. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, added, "And I'm sorry too, John, for not stepping in when things got tough between you two. I should have done more to help." John looked from Sarah to Andrew, his emotions welling up. He had always felt like he was carrying the weight of the family's expectations, trying to keep everyone together to fix things that felt broken. But hearing them both speak so openly, he hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words. "Thank you," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't always know how to say it, but I appreciate it. I know it wasn't easy for any of us." There was a pause, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken agreement. Finally, John spoke again, his voice steady but honest. "I've been learning too, learning how to open up, how to let go of some of the things I've held onto for so long. It's not easy, but I'm trying, and I'm willing to keep trying." Andrew nodded, his gaze softening. "I'm willing to try too, Dad. I want to be there for you, for Sarah, for us." The conversation shifted from apologies to possibilities. They talked about how they could support each other better moving forward, how they could make time for more family gatherings, more chances to rebuild what had been lost. There was a tentative optimism in the air, a realization that they were all starting from a new place, a place of understanding, of trying. As the evening wound down, the conversation began to feel more natural. Laughter replaced the awkward silences, and for the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of ease between them. They had started the evening with uncertainty, but they were ending it with something else, a fragile but hopeful sense that things were beginning to heal. But as John closed the door behind them that night, a question lingered in his mind. Was this the beginning of something lasting? Or was it just another step in a long road of rebuilding, with more setbacks yet to come? The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, John felt like they were heading in the right direction. Things had started to feel different. After months of tense silence and sporadic efforts to bridge the gap, John had finally begun to see the faintest glimmer of change in his relationship with Andrew. They were communicating more openly, understanding each other in ways they hadn't before. For the first time in a long time, John allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path. But just as the air between them began to clear, a new storm was on the horizon. Andrew came over one evening looking more unsettled than usual. He had news, something that would change everything. As soon as he sat down, John knew something was off. "I've been offered a job," Andrew said, his voice strained. "It's a great opportunity, more money, more responsibility, but it's in another city. I'd have to move." John felt the room tilt. His mind raced, heart pounding as the words sank in. A job offer. Another reason for Andrew to distance himself, another excuse to pull away. For a brief moment, John was frozen, caught between the flickering hope that had just started to settle and the overwhelming sense of déjà vu. Not again. The past came rushing back to him. The years of feeling abandoned, of watching Andrew choose his career, his life, over family. It was happening again, only this time it felt more permanent. Andrew, John's voice was quieter than he intended, his words measured but laced with something deeper, something painful. Are you really going to do this? Move again? After everything we've been through, I thought we were finally getting somewhere. Andrew's eyes darkened and he leaned forward, running his hand through his hair. It's not like that, Dad. It's a big opportunity for me. You know that. I've worked hard for this. I know, John replied, his chest tightening. But what about us? What about this? All the time we've spent trying to reconnect, does that mean nothing? The question hung heavy in the room, the weight of it suffocating. Andrew looked torn, his face a mixture of frustration and guilt. I don't know what to say. I'm not abandoning you. I'm trying to balance everything and I don't know how. I don't know what the right choice is. Sarah, who had been sitting silently beside Andrew, spoke up, her voice softer than usual. Andrew, you have to think about how this move would affect your relationship with Dad. I know how hard it's been for you both. Don't let it slip away just because of a job. John watched her, feeling the truth of her words, but also feeling the helplessness that always seemed to follow these conversations. The constant back and forth, the promises made and then broken. Was it worth it? Could he keep putting his heart on the line, only to watch it unravel again? Dad, I swear I'm not abandoning you, Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. This is just a big decision. I'm torn. I don't know what to do. John's heart squeezed painfully as he stood up, unable to stay seated any longer. His voice cracked as he finally confronted Andrew. You don't get it, do you? You've been making decisions your whole life and I've been left in the dust. The years of feeling like I don't matter, like I'm just an afterthought. You've built your life and I've just been trying to catch up, hoping that one day you'd see me. There was a long silence. Andrew looked as though he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. John's breath quickened, the exhaustion of it all settling deep in his bones. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Andrew. I don't know if I can keep waiting for you to come back, to figure out where I stand in your life. Andrew, his face filled with guilt, opened his mouth to speak, but John held up his hand. I need to think, I need space. As Andrew left that evening, John sat alone, his mind racing, the question gnawing at him. Would this relationship ever truly heal? Or was it doomed to remain in this perpetual cycle of hope, disappointment, and quiet abandonment? The future felt uncertain, and the weight of everything that had come before lingered in the air between them. The decision was made. Andrew had taken the job. He sat across from John in the living room, his posture stiff, as if he were bracing for a storm. The news had hit John harder than he expected, deeper than he cared to admit. Andrew's face was filled with the same conflicted expression he'd worn when he first brought the offer up, but there was no backing out now. The job was a great opportunity, one Andrew had worked toward for years. John knew that. He understood the logic, but the emotional weight was suffocating. So that's it, John asked, his voice quieter than he wanted it to be. You're really going through with it? Andrew nodded, his voice lacking its usual conviction. I am, Dad. I've thought about it a lot. I don't want to hurt you, but I need to take this step for myself. John felt the familiar sting of betrayal, sharp and cold. It wasn't just the job offer. It was the way it seemed to erase everything they'd worked for, everything they'd started to rebuild. The nights of honest conversations, the small but significant moments of progress, they all felt so fragile now. John had hoped that their relationship would come first, that Andrew would see how much they still had to work on. But instead, it felt like he was choosing to walk away again, just like before. After everything, Andrew, I thought we were starting to get somewhere. John's voice cracked slightly. You said you wanted to rebuild, but now it feels like it's all falling apart again. Did any of it mean anything? Andrew's face twisted with regret. It does mean something, Dad, but this is something I can't pass up. I don't know how to explain it, but I need to do this. I'm not leaving you behind. I just need to move forward. The words didn't ease the pain, they only deepened it. The more Andrew spoke, the more John felt like he was being pushed further away, like all of his efforts to bring his son back into his life had been in vain. How many times had he tried to fix their relationship, only to watch it unravel again and again? The anger bubbled up, but it was quickly replaced by exhaustion, the kind of fatigue that settles deep in your bones when you've fought too many battles without victory. Sarah, ever the mediator, stepped in, her voice steady. "John, I know this is hard, but Andrew isn't abandoning you. He's not leaving because of you, he's leaving because of his journey, and you need to understand that. He's still trying to figure things out. Don't shut him out now." John didn't know how to respond. He wanted to believe her, to see the situation through Andrew's eyes, but the hurt was too fresh. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Sarah. I can't keep trying if this is just going to keep happening. I've given everything I have." As the days passed and Andrew made preparations to move, John spent more time reflecting on what he wanted moving forward. He knew he couldn't control Andrew's decisions. He had tried that for years, and it had only driven a wedge between them. But the truth was harder to accept than he wanted to admit. Healing wasn't something you could rush, and it wasn't something you could make happen just by wanting it. It was a slow, painful process, and he had to let go of the need for a resolution, a neat ending. There would be no perfect moment. The night before Andrew left, they had one final conversation. Andrew, standing with his suitcase in hand, looked at his father. "I'm sorry, Dad," he sobbed. His voice low. "I really am. I want you to know that I'm not leaving because of you, but I'm still figuring this all out. I'm not giving up on us. I'll come back. I'll visit, I promise." John heard the promise, but his heart was guarded. How many times had he heard similar words before? How many times had they fallen short? But despite the doubts that lingered, he managed a small nod. I want you to be happy, Andrew, but I can't keep waiting for you to come back. I need to start figuring out my own life too." They stood there for a long moment, the distance between them more than just physical. But John knew that this was the only way forward for both of them. As Andrew left the house the next morning, the question lingered in John's mind. Would the distance between them ever truly close, or would this be another chapter in their fractured relationship? The road to healing was long, and John knew it wasn't over yet. The knock on the door was unexpected. John had been sitting alone in the living room, the soft hum of the afternoon sun filtering through the window. It was Father's Day, a day that usually felt heavy with unspoken words, memories of years gone by and the absence of what could have been. But today felt different. He hadn't heard from Andrew in months, not since he moved away, and honestly, he hadn't expected to. He wasn't sure where they stood anymore. The promise Andrew made to visit often had seemed more like a distant hope than a reality. But now there it was, the knock. John opened the door and there stood Andrew, standing on the threshold, looking almost as surprised as John felt. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said, his voice tentative but sincere. "I didn't know if I should call first, but I thought I'd surprise you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years between them were a silence neither could ignore, yet here they were, facing each other again. John's heart fluttered, his joy conflicting with the old wariness that still lingered. Was this visit a genuine step forward, or just another attempt to mend things quickly, only to pull away again? He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of heartbreak again. "Well, come in then," John said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't quite understand. He stepped aside, watching Andrew as he entered, his movements uncertain, like a man unsure of how to navigate a space he had once known so well. They stood in the living room, the familiar silence returning, this time heavier. John gestured to the couch. "Sit down, Andrew. It's good to see you." Andrew sat, his eyes glancing around the room, lingering on the old photographs that lined the shelves. His gaze softened, but his voice was tinged with something John couldn't quite place. "It's been a tough few months, Dad," Andrew admitted, his words coming slowly. "The move. It wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. I didn't realize how much I'd miss this place, miss you." John felt the familiar weight of hesitation in his chest. His heart ached with a mixture of longing and caution. "It's been hard on both of us, hasn't it?" John replied, his tone guarded. He didn't know how to react. Part of him wanted to reach out, to pull Andrew back into the fold and forget the distance, but another part of him feared the pain of being let down again. Andrew leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his eyes meeting John's. "I've missed you, Dad. I didn't realize how much until I was away, and I know I hurt you by leaving. I was selfish. But I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I want to make it right. I want to be a part of your life again." The sincerity in Andrew's voice struck something deep in John. Despite the guarded walls he'd built, despite the betrayals of the past, he couldn't ignore the sincerity. Andrew was here on Father's Day, not just to check off a box, but because he genuinely wanted to be closer. John's heart swelled with cautious hope, but he kept his emotions in check. Was this real? The conversation flowed more easily after that. They talked about everything: the move, the challenges, the small victories. They laughed about old family memories, even shared a few awkward silences that somehow felt less strained than before. It was, in its own way, the closest they had come to being a family again in a long time. As the afternoon wore on, John's phone rang. It was Sarah. John answered with a soft smile, and soon Sarah's voice filled the air. "Hey, John, I was just thinking about you. Happy Father's Day." Andrew, hearing Sarah's voice, joined in. "Hey, Sarah, it's been a while." The conversation between the three of them was light, full of the warmth of old familiarity, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like they were truly together, despite the miles that had come between them. They all acknowledged the challenges they'd faced, but in that moment the bond between them felt genuine, like something they could rebuild, slowly but sure. Lie. As the day ended and Andrew left, John stood at the door watching him go. He felt a flicker of hope, tempered with the knowledge that relationships, real relationships, take time. He wasn't sure what the future held, but as he closed the door, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the road ahead wasn't as uncertain as he had thought. But would it be enough to keep them together, or would the distance creep back in once more? It had been a year since that painful confrontation, since Andrew had moved away and left John to pick up the pieces of their fractured relationship. Time had passed, and John wasn't sure if the space between them had healed completely, but it had definitely softened. They were staying in touch more regularly now. Phone calls, texts, the occasional video chat. Each conversation wasn't just about checking in, but about reconnecting, sharing little details of their lives that they had both missed. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for John, that was enough. He had started to accept that relationships didn't need to be fixed overnight. When Andrew and Sarah announced that they were coming home for Christmas, John was both thrilled and anxious. It had been so long since they had spent the holiday together, and he wasn't sure what to expect. The wounds from the past still lingered, though they were less sharp now. But in the months leading up to Christmas, John had slowly come to terms with something. He wasn't going to focus on the things that had gone wrong anymore. He wasn't going to let those mistakes define their relationship. What mattered now was the possibility of what could be, the hope that they could build something new, something stronger, on the foundation of what they had. When the day arrived, John stood in his living room, preparing for the arrival of his son and his wife. The house was modestly decorated, but there was a warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. The tree was adorned with ornaments from years past, and the fireplace crackled softly, as if welcoming them all back. As the doorbell rang, John's heart skipped a beat. He opened the door to find Andrew and Sarah standing there, smiling, holding a small gift for him. The tension between them was almost non-existent, replaced by something else, something real, something John hadn't dared to hope for. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said, his voice warm, his eyes meeting John's with a sincerity that John hadn't felt in years. "Merry Christmas." "Welcome home," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. It felt like something was shifting between them, like the air was finally clearing. They spent the day together, laughing, reminiscing about old Christmases and sharing stories about what their lives had been like in the time apart. There were moments of awkwardness, yes. Those old patterns still tried to creep in, but they were fewer and farther between. It was as if they were finally able to see each other clearly for the first time in years. John was no longer focused on what had gone wrong, on the things he couldn't change. He had learned to let go of his need for control, and in doing so, he found himself letting go of the anger and resentment that had built up over the years. Andrew, for his part, had let go of his fear of judgment. He didn't feel like he had to live up to some impossible standard anymore. He was just himself, and that was enough. Sarah noticed the change in both of them, and for the first time, she could truly see that they were in a good place, a place where healing had finally begun to take root. As they gathered around the table for Christmas dinner, the warmth in the room was undeniable. There was no more awkwardness, no more distance. They had spent so much time focusing on the past that they hadn't realized how much the present had to offer. John looked around the table at his family, at Andrew and Sarah, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Real peace. For the first time in years, John didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. He was finally free to enjoy the moment. But as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the thought: was this truly the beginning of something new? Or was this just another fleeting moment in the long road ahead? Only time would tell. It was the holiday season again, and the house was filled with a warmth that had been missing for so long. John stood at the window, watching the soft snowfall outside, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. The years of tension, the battles fought in silence, the emotional distance between him and Andrew, it all felt so distant now. They had come so far. He had come so far. Andrew and John had spent countless hours talking, really talking, about everything that had happened between them. They'd reflected on their journey, both the painful moments and the small victories. And in those conversations, John had begun to see it clearly. All the effort, the pain, the frustration, it had been worth it. They were no longer the strangers who only shared a bloodline. They were father and son again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that realness, John found peace. As they sat down for dinner, the table was filled with familiar faces: Linda, Sarah, and Andrew, of course. The awkwardness of previous gatherings was nowhere to be found. There was no tension in the air, no unspoken resentments lingering just beneath the surface. There was only the warmth of a family that had finally found its way back to each other. The meal was simple, but the company was everything. They laughed, they reminisced, and for the first time in years, John felt the absence of fear. The fear that the past would repeat itself, the fear that Andrew would pull away again. It was gone, replaced by something more enduring: peace. John looked around the table at his family, feeling a quiet gratitude in his chest. He had spent so much time worried about things he couldn't control, about trying to fix a relationship that seemed irreparably broken. But now, as he looked at Andrew, his son, the man sitting across from him, so much like the boy he used to be, John realized that the work he'd put into healing their bond had created something stronger, something that could withstand whatever came next. The years of effort had been painful, yes, but it had built something worth fighting for. In the corner of the room, Sarah and Linda were talking softly, their voices a quiet hum in the background. John couldn't hear their words, but he saw the smiles on their faces, the way they exchanged looks of understanding. They both knew how far they'd come. They both knew the journey wasn't over, but they also knew that the family they had now was far stronger than the one they had before. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. As the evening went on, Andrew and John found themselves alone for a moment, sitting together in the warmth of the living room. The fire crackled softly in the background, and for the first time there was no tension between them. No walls, no fear of what would come next. Just two people, father and son, finally seeing each other clearly. "I'm glad we've made it this far," Andrew said, his voice full of gratitude. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm really proud of how far we've come. You've been patient with me, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." John nodded, his heart swelling with pride. It hasn't been easy, Andrew, but I'm glad we've both worked for this. I think we're finally in a good place, and I want to keep that, even when distance pulls us apart. Andrew smiled, a sincere, unguarded smile. I do too. I want to stay close no matter what happens. As they sat together, the weight of the past seemed to melt away, leaving behind only the hope for the future. John looked at his son, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments when it seemed impossible, but the love and understanding they had found along the way had become their legacy. A bond built on patience, forgiveness, and mutual respect, stronger than ever before. But even as John sat back, feeling that sense of peace, a quiet question lingered. Would this newfound bond be enough to carry them through whatever came next, or would the road ahead challenge them once more?